Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaRevelis and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link down in the description to the page, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. My name is Joshua Revelis. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down with fellow enthusiasts to talk about what's going on in the technology, business, and gaming world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Revelis. I am your host as usual. And yeah, I think overall, based on the polls this week, I think it was pretty straightforward on what the topic would be for Friday's episode. Because we already had Wednesday's episode lined up about last week. So it was kind of straightforward. Next week, obviously, we're going to be doing the polls to decide the two topics. We're mainly going to focus in on probably one poll and just decide which topic to cover first. And the other would be for Friday. Another thing to talk about, a little maintenance things we're going to be talking about before we go into the topic is, so you guys voted, and I will not be actually re-record the banner episode because for some reason you guys seem to just keep it that way. I don't know why. Maybe it's just a reminder hey, show where you started, show how you were. And I think, that's what you guys were thinking. Then, all right, all for it. Then just won't touch it. Just won't touch the episode then. But I think that should be pretty much it. I think in terms of maintenance stuff for the show, schedule stays the same way. I think that's pretty much it. So let's go into the topic that you guys voted for. So we're going to be talking about the MacBook Pros. Not really the MacBooks, because I don't think there's really much to talk about. The Pros are the main ones I want to talk about, because if you know me in real life and you know my opinion on a lot of stuff regarding PCs and computers, or laptops specifically, it's almost like a love-hate relationship I have with the MacBooks, specifically the Pros. Because that's mainly what we're going to focus on is the Pro versions, because I think overall in the terms of the category on the amount of crap that those machines have been through, like I said, I have a love-hate relationship. I appreciate the idea behind it and the whole bridging the gap and not making a product for consumers, but making a prosumer to professional product. Because when you think about it, and this is something we'll talk about because, we have to talk about the Mac Pro eventually. We have to talk about it. And the market, when you think of technology, is split up into three categories. And I think there's easy ways to think about them: consumer, prosumer, and professionals. Obviously, consumer is just everyday Joes. You just use it and boom, there you go. Just the everyday people. And then we go into the prosumer, which is people that do semi-professional work, but they're not all the way in. It's more than what the normal person does, essentially. You do more than the consumer. You're not just using it for dumb things, clearly. And then obviously professional, straightforward. These are for big companies or professional artists that use these machines to record music, make films, things like that, very professional type things that what they're going to be used for. And the MacBook Pro is overall what I consider is the bridge that bridges prosumer and professional, because obviously it's not a consumer good. And as I've stated before, I love the MacBook Pros. I think in terms of what they do, they are an elite class of laptops. I know a lot of people are like, Josh, are you sure you're not just trying to suck off Apple on this one? And not really. I'm being honest with you guys because, like I said, I appreciate the technology for what it is. If it's a good product, no matter who makes it, it's a good product. That's kind of the point behind it. And as much as a lot of people like to bash Apple, because being honest, yes, while the MacBook Pros I consider an elite laptop, they have some of the biggest drawbacks out of any laptop I've ever seen. And this all comes down to the whole idea of changing their focus on them. And that's why I titled this episode, The MacBook Pro, Great Concept But Failed Execution. The main reason I go with failed execution is due to the fact that for the past, I'd say, 3 generations of the Mac the MacBook Pros, essentially, they've all been flops. They've all had the same issue over and over and over. We've seen it 3 times in a row. And it wasn't until the 3rd generation that we saw even bigger issues pop up. And that's what we're going to talk about. Like, we're going to mainly focus on the benefits and drawbacks of them because, like I said, a lot of people will argue that the benefits outweigh the drawbacks, but I would make the argument that it's more of a gamble in that sense, that it's not a straightforward, yeah, the pros outweigh the cons or cons outweigh the pros. Like, I don't think it's as straightforward as that, because some people are like, well, the MacBook Pros, mainly people that use them, which I've seen examples of people using them, and I know people that have them, and I've used the machines before, that a lot of people tend to use them for video editing, or I'd say mostly, like, a lot of people I see are like YouTubers that tend to have them, and they always carry them as their mobile editing machine, but they also have their main workstation. And while I do agree that the MacBook Pro specifically serves a great purpose, because that's mainly the whole idea, the design language behind these things is high-powered PCs that are meant to go on the go, and they don't take up that much space. They're very light machines. However, when you look at I think it was a 15 was the last one that had the ton of ports. Like, it was a thick boy. Thick boy. Those MacBook Pros were thick because they had a lot of ports, and, you know, it was a prosumer product, professional product. That's why it had Pro in the name. And they were a lot bigger than what they are now because they had a ton of ports. They had multiple USB ports, USB-A's. They had, I don't think they really had USB Type-C because that really wasn't that popular. You had Thunderbolt. You had a lot of good ports on there. They had a lot of ports. And it wasn't until the 2017 refresh when they took away all those ports and slimmed them down into this slim design to make it, I'd say, to incorporate this whole design language of portable, very light, but very powerful. There was just a big drawback with that. Obviously, you can't have the traditional keyboard setup. Like, you can't have a traditional keyboard with it. Clearly, you can't, because it's so small and the frame isn't that big, so you have to figure out how to put the keys in there, or mechanical switches. So Apple obviously came up with the butterfly method. The butterfly method was in the sense that making the keys work like a butterfly's wings. However, when they did that, it also came with the drawbacks of a butterfly's wings, because a butterfly, it's a very elegant insect. It clearly is very elegant, very beautiful, but very fragile. And because of that, the keys started breaking because of dust and because of little things. Like, they would just stop working. And this happened on the 1st generation. People were like, hey, you know, what gives? So when they made the 2nd generation, they're like, we fixed it. They didn't fix it. We go to the 3rd generation. They added the silicone. I don't know if it's silicone gel, but it's like a type of webbing they added inside under the keys to prevent it. And the key still broke. And then we go into the 4th generation, I'd say mid-year update, not really like a whole new one, just an update in specs model that came out recently. That one, they said that they fixed it again. You know, we still have to see. But because of the 3rd generation, because of the beefier specs, because like I said, these are professional products, so they need to be very powerful machines, clearly. They have to be. So obviously, they put in a lot of the updated CPUs inside those things. They put, like, the HN i7. They put the i9 in there. Like, they put a good amount of stuff in there. They put, like, a lot of updated specs. And they're very powerful machines. I'm not going to lie. We're going to go into the pro section before we go into that big con. Because we already talked about one con, which is the keyboard. Like, the reliability of the keyboard went down as they decided to do that transition from a more thicker design for professionals with all the ports to a more slimmed down, easier to carry design. And another pro would be obviously the software and the hardware, because whether you want to believe it or not, a lot of pros prefer using Apple software because Apple software is very high class. It runs very smooth. You rarely ever get bugs with it because it's well optimized and it runs incredibly well. Like, a lot of people like using Final Cut Pro and, you know, Lightroom. There's a lot of good stuff in the Apple ecosystem, and they make it very affordable too. You just pay for the software. That's all. You don't do a subscription like with the Adobe suite. But, and this is a big but, because of all the very powerful software, you require a lot of beefy specs. Clearly, you need very good hardware to run those softwares incredibly well, because a lot of the prosumer and consumer market tend to rely, especially if they're doing video editing, they're mostly working with either 4K or 8K. Like, they're working in that range because, like I mentioned, a lot of people that have them, that I've seen that have them, primarily work with 8K cameras and 4K cameras. They work with a lot of high-end gear, not cheap gear for a reason. That's why they're not consumers, because I don't see a consumer spending $8+ grand on a giant red camera to carry around. Clearly not. But a prosumer and professional market, clearly they do, because they rely on that kind of technology and equipment. So because of that, they had to update the MacBook Pros to have beefy specs. And so when we got the 2018 versions of these things, we ran into some issues because, like I said, you're putting a lot of beefy specs inside of a smaller body, and because of that, those beefier specs will generate a lot more heat. And because of that heat, and there's no proper way to ventilate that heat due to the small chassis, they thermal throttle hard, and not just like every other laptop where thermal throttling is kind of a good thing. Well, not really a good thing, but it's easy to avoid in laptops if you undervolt the CPU and things like that. But like I said, with the small chassis, even if you undervolt, you're still going to thermal throttle really hard. And based on what I saw, the thermal throttling mainly only happened with the i9 version, but that's because the i9 generates a lot of heat. That's why, people that have them in PCs, they probably have some really good fans in those things to cool that sucker, because the i9 is a hot chip to run. It generates a lot of heat, and it's very powerful, but that's kind of the drawback, because it generates a lot of power, but due to the fact it's going to generate a lot of heat. And due to that, the iMac Pros not MacBook Pros, what am I talking about? They were generating a lot of heat and thermal throttling, and because of that, the machines were almost, I'd say, essentially useless when people first got it. Like Dave2D dropped a video about it, and he showed it. He showed where the only way to use the laptop properly was to put it in a refrigerator. I laughed my ass off when I saw that because it was really funny, but that's very concerning, because I shouldn't be relying on using my professional laptop in a refrigerator to make it work properly. That's not how that's supposed to work. Clearly, it's not. And because of that, Apple ran into a lot of flack, and they had to figure out how to fix it. So they thought, well, let's put a software update, and hopefully that fixes it. But, I think it did help, but it still doesn't fix it, because, like I said, you're essentially trying to fix a physics problem with software. That's not how that works. Like, the laws of physics aren't going to change because of code. Like, that's not how that works. The laws of physics dictate that thing is going to thermal throttle no matter what you do because of its chassis. You're generating a lot of heat and no proper way to cool it inside a small chassis. Like, the laws of physics will tell you otherwise. And because of that, that's a huge drawback. So the two main drawbacks that we have to think about with the MacBook Pros are the keyboards are very bad because they're very fragile and they break very easily, and they've already shown they haven't been able to fix this. Clearly, they've tried 3-4 times. We still haven't seen the fourth time, but the third, you tried 3 times in a row and it failed. And then we have the thermal throttling issues. We still haven't seen how the new updated version for the 9th gen i9 inside the new ones that just came out. But I think we're still going to run into the same issue. And then we go into the ports, because as much as people think this is a nitpicky and this is just being like petty Roosevelt, let's call it that. The fact that it doesn't have a lot of the ports that a lot of professionals rely on is very concerning, because you just basically are making people to buy dongles, and you're making them buy docks, essentially. It's what you're doing. And that's what a lot of people do. And I've seen is a lot of people, they carry a lot of peripherals with their laptop, so they have to carry like this little dock that has all these other ports. They connect it in one of the USB-C ports, and they're able to have like their USB-A ports, their headphone jack, etc. Like, it's really dumb. In my opinion, it was a bad call to do that, because the 2015 MacBook Pro, the last one that had all the ports, had all the ports. A lot of people loved it, and when they upgraded to the new one, they were pissed. Like, yes, I get it. You want to go with this new design language, but it doesn't work for the professional market because they rely on a lot of those ports. Like, the industry, yes, USB-C is an industry standard right now. It's going in that direction. It already is. But that doesn't mean that every peripheral has been upgraded to rely on USB-C. There's some things that still use USB-A, USB 3.0. Like, there's a reason those ports exist. They still keep them because they keep updating them. And they're very fast, too. They're not bad. USB-C is still an industry standard, and they're still figuring it out. I'd say they're technically figuring it out, but it's pretty much on everything now. Like, heck, Apple put it on the new iPad Pros that came out last year. So, will they be on the new iPhones? Probably not. I think the day Apple does that, they're going to be... they're probably going to realize, okay, Lightning is a dumb idea. But that's another thing. But the MacBook Pros, as much as I bash these things, because in my opinion, I never see myself using it. Like, in my opinion, I don't really see myself ever using a Mac or Mac OS. Realistically, I don't. I prefer using Windows because, one, Windows games a lot better. Let's just scientific fact. Like, I don't even think you can argue with me on that. Windows can run games incredibly well, and it's the only thing you need to use. Windows 10 is still a buggy mess. We're not gonna lie. Windows is still an issue, but clearly Microsoft's still working and they're figuring it out. Obviously, there are benefits to macOS. Clearly, the benefits with macOS include like better security, more stable ecosystem. Clearly, very professional software that's industry standard across the board, no matter which way you try to do it. And a lot of professional gear works incredibly well with the MacBooks and the iMacs and things like that. But specifically the MacBooks is what we're focusing on. But you get the point. They work incredibly well, and there's no issue. Windows, sometimes some gear works well, and then sometimes some things don't. But the MacBook Pro, in my opinion, is an incredible machine. It comes down to the fact that you change this idea behind it, what it was originally meant for, and what the MacBook Pro represented originally, and then you change it to something that just doesn't work. Because I've ran into this issue, well, not really an issue, but it's me kind of being just nitpicky and questioning. I see high school students walking around with MacBook Pros, and I'm like, why? Why do you need a almost $2,000 laptop to take notes in school? And they're like, I don't know, it's pretty cool, man. I'm like, it's so dumb, just get a Chromebook. Like, it baffles me because you make this product meant for prosumer and professionals, and then you run into things with consumers using them, and it just doesn't make any sense. Because it's like, why would you spend that much on a machine you don't even know how to fully utilize it, or even bother to utilize it to its fullest? Clearly, like, some people be like, Josh, isn't that a little bit of judging? Aren't you being kind of a jerk? But I'm like, no, it's just asking a reasonable question. It's like, why would you spend $2,000 or ask somebody to spend $2,000 on a laptop you will never use? Like, my laptop for college, the one that I have, my HP Omen 15, was $1,000+. Like, it was like $1,500 with the warranties and things like that. But it costs $1,000 base. I use my machine to its fullest because, one, I like to game on it. It's a gaming laptop, so obviously I was going to game on it. But also it does all my CAD designing that I need to have it do, and it can run all my CAD designs really well. Obviously, I can use it for the show, for editing the shows and everything. Clearly, that's pretty much how I edit the shows. I can record it on the Zoom and then pop the SD card in there, and boom, there we go. We're on our way. I think it just comes down to the idea that Apple is kind of confusing. And this is kind of comes down to the point that, I always say with the iPad Pro, that in my opinion, with iPad OS and the direction that Apple could take the iPad, yeah, I think it will end up replacing the iMac Pro the MacBook Pro at the direction they're going, because there's not that much drawbacks to the iPad anymore besides being smaller, battery life probably as good, not as good, and then accessories and things like that. But the fact that now the iPad Pro with iPad OS is going to be able to, the Files app got a huge redesign, and I'm glad they did it. It's going to have access to external files, like things like that. Very good implementation, like desktop browsing on Safari, redesigning how you're going to operate it. And I think that's a great addition. And I've already told people this. Apple, realistically, the MacBook Pro, as much as I love this thing, I don't think it should be around anymore. Because think about it. You failed the design 3 times in a row. What makes you think you're going to figure it out a 4th time? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I know, like, I wanted, like, okay. I think a proposed solution for these things is to go back to the original design and make them thicker. I think making these things thicker is probably the best direction they can go. Because one, you give people their ports back. They want the ports back. They don't want to keep carrying docks around. It's really stupid. And at the same time, they're able to manage the heat on these things a lot better because you're putting a lot of beefier stuff inside the MacBook Pros. So you need them to be able to be cooled a lot more efficiently. So I think making them thicker is the direction. But obviously, it will come down to Apple swallowing the pill. And the pill of being their pride, because they're like, well, we made these things to be slim and thin so that, you know, they have a very professional look. The problem is they don't run like they work most of the time, not all the time. When you buy something this expensive, you need it to work all the time because it needs to be able to do the job effectively and consistently. That is what prosumers and professionals rely on, is that they rely on their machines. When they need to do something, it does it. That's why they spend a lot of money on those machines. So that's why people get more frustrated when you spend a lot of money on something and it does not work to the way it's supposed to be because of some issue. Like, obviously, yes, I understand that not everything in terms of technology is perfect. There's always going to be design flaws in everything. There's always going to be things people want to nitpick, clearly. I'm not going to understate that. But when you make a mistake 3 times in a row and you still don't learn and you're being stubborn about it, then yeah, people will get pissed. Like, it's like I said, like, it's kind of the main reason why I kind of agree with Henny that Henny does all his work on his iPad. And the iPad, people have already shown videos of them able to edit and render 4K video on an iPad, and it's very cool. It doesn't make any sound at all. And you get a very great experience. It just takes time to learn how to use it and how to manage it, essentially. And the fact that now Apple's making it a lot easier for the iPad to do all these things, I honestly think Apple might end up just pulling the trigger and just making the iPad a valuable option against the MacBook Pro. Like, they probably might end up competing themselves, realistically. And I think it's a great idea because the iPad Pro presents a lot more consistency than the MacBook Pros because it doesn't have the same keyboard flaw, because you can buy a keyboard case. And Logitech makes a really good keyboard case for the iPad Pros that have been very consistent and very great experiences for a lot of people. They do a lot of the things. They have professional software because a lot of more professional developers are pumping software into the iPad Pros. Like LumaFusion 2.0 is coming out. LumaFusion is a very popular video editing software on the iPads. It runs incredibly well. Does a lot of things like Final Cut. Like, if they ever put Final Cut on the things, then yeah, I guarantee you a lot of people will probably drop the MacBook Pros because they're like, no, we're tired of these inconsistencies. We're just going to pay the money for the iPad. It's a lot cheaper, and it has the performance to boot because Apple's using their own custom silicon, and they're able to manage it completely because they own the entire process. Like, with the MacBook Pros, it's a little bit challenging because, like I said, Apple makes their own SSDs, but they don't make the cores. If Apple put their own silicon inside, maybe I think that would probably... And that's probably another solution would be try putting your own silicon chips. Like Apple, you make your own chips, and you make very powerful chips that are very industry leading. Why don't you just put those inside the MacBooks? Like, why not? It makes a lot of sense. Like, you have them in-house. You can manage the entire process, and you can effectively make them not run so hot. Like, that's... I think, in my opinion, I think that's probably the direction. If they decide to go direction, it's probably going to be that one. They're going to implement their own silicon and see if that fixes the issue. The keyboard thing, though, I don't know how you're going to fix that without making the thing thicker. It's either you have to make it thicker or that keyboard's not getting fixed. Like, you're not going to fix that keyboard issue. Like, there's not really much I can say on that. And I think it just comes down to Apple realizing to not be so stubborn. Because they issued an apology. Like, they know it's an issue, and they openly stated that, yes, they have failed 3 times in a row to fix it, and they have not fixed it. So we have to see where Apple goes with this. Like I said, the MacBook Pro, it's a great concept. I love the idea behind it. I love how it connects the prosumer and professional market very well, but its execution was failed miserably due to 3 big drawbacks that for a lot of people killed it. People still buy it, and a lot of people still use it, but they understand that, hey, we might need to switch. And that's why, like, a lot of people are tempted to switch out of it because they're like, it just doesn't work the way we want it to all the time. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I really liked this episode, even though some people say it was a little bit more negative, Josh, than you think. But I think it's just like I said, is I have a love-hate relationship with this laptop. Realistically, I followed it a lot. Like I said, I personally would never use macOS, but I still can appreciate what these things represent in the market and how much they've impacted a lot of people's lives, especially because a lot of professionals use these laptops to do a lot of their work if they want to be mobile. A lot of YouTubers use them to edit their videos. A lot of people you like watching probably use them. So it's a love-hate relationship. But I still think these machines, I think they're still good. I just think it comes down to how are they going to think about fixing these issues? Because the worst case scenario is that they discontinue them, and I really hope they don't go that direction. I hope they don't just discontinue the MacBook Pro and just be on with it. I hope they don't do that. That's a terrible idea. But we'll see what Apple does. I thank you guys for listening to this episode. I hope you guys come back and listen to next week's episode. But until then, I love you guys to death. You guys have yourselves a wonderful weekend. Be safe, guys. Don't do anything dumb. I love you guys to death. Bye, guys.